Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. And we begin as we usually do with the economy. Yesterday, Hong Kong-based the South China Morning Post published an interesting piece called China's Rust Belt Regions at Risk of Being Left Behind as Coastal Economies Surge, arguing that, quote, local level debt, an imbalanced industrial structure, and population outflows continue to take a hefty toll on efforts to revitalize China's poorer regions, end quote. China's Rust Belt provinces, traditionally reliant on industries such as coal and property, are facing mounting economic challenges, widening the gap with coastal regions that are benefiting from booming exports and technological achievements. The stark contrast between these regions, the piece argues, highlights the difficulties in transitioning from old industrial bases to modern economic hubs. One of the most striking examples of this slowdown is Shanxi Province, not to be confused with Shanxi Province of terracotta warrior fame, China's primary coal producer. In 2024, it was the only provincial-level jurisdiction to report a decline in nominal gross domestic product, contracting by 2.14%. Additionally, Shanxi recorded the nation's lowest real GDP growth at 2.3%, falling behind Qinghai's 2.7% and Heilongjiang's 3.2%. The economic struggles of China's northeast provinces, Liaoning, Heilongjiang, and Jilin, have been ongoing since the 1990s, exacerbated by rising debt, loss of market competitiveness, and significant population outflows. Tianjin, a major northern port city, has also been weighed down by financial burdens and economic stagnation in recent years. Shanxi, still heavily dependent on coal, saw its coal production decline by 6.9% in 2024. Manufacturing output also fell by 1.1%, while property investment dropped 5.1%. Even once promising industries have suffered. For instance, iPhone maker Foxconn, which once bolstered local employment, has relocated some of its production overseas, causing Shanxi's cell phone production to plummet by 29.2%. This industrial imbalance has led to dwindling job opportunities and restricted access to quality education, fueling one of China's most severe population outflows. Between 2010 and 2023, Shanxi lost 1 million residents, with its population dropping from 35.7 million to 34.7 million. In contrast, China's coastal regions, particularly the Changsanjiao Yangtze River Delta and the Zhusanjiao Pearl River Delta, have thrived by embracing emerging industries. Zhejiang Province, with its provincial capital, Hangzhou, home to AI startup Deepens, robotics firm Unitree, gaming studio behind Wukong Black Myth, Game Science, and, of course, technology giant Alibaba, reported a robust 5.5% economic growth in 2024, outpacing the national average of 5%. Of course, these are all official numbers, and so we take them with a grain of salt, but it does show the regional wealth disparities. Beijing has pursued revitalization efforts for the northeast since 2003, but the process remains arduous. As China seeks to modernize its economy, leadership has placed increasing emphasis on high-growth regions to drive the nation's GDP forward. For Rust Belt provinces, the challenge lies in reducing their reliance on traditional industries and fostering new economic engines to bridge the widening gap with China's thriving coastal provinces. Speaking on these stories, Peking University Professor of Finance Michael Pettis observed in a post today, quote, for years I've been telling clients that for all the promises of convergence, China is becoming two increasingly different regions. The good China, consisting of 6 or 7 coastal provinces, is relatively wealthy, has diversified economies with high but mostly manageable debt and a growing working age population. The bad China, which includes the northeast, is much poorer, much less diversified, has an unmanageable debt burden, and accounts for more than 100% of the decline in China's working age population. Among other things, apartment prices may be near to bottoming out in the former, whereas in the latter, it is hard to imagine demand being able to absorb the current supply excess except over many, many more years. End quote. Policymakers have a very difficult decision to make. Tax the wealthy regions to support the poorer regions, reducing dynamism and growth across the economy, or let the wealthy coast grow, leaving the billion poor citizens in the poorer provinces behind, and slowly splitting the country into two increasingly unstable halves. Next up, questions surrounding the quality and accuracy of generic drugs in China continue to mount, despite regulatory reassurances. Over the weekend, the National Healthcare Security Administration, NHSA, and the National Medical Products Administration, NMPA, released findings from an investigation into companies raised by doctors in Beijing and Shanghai. Their conclusion dismissed concerns about generic drugs in the bulk procurement system as being based on, quote, anecdotes and subjective feelings, end quote. However, independent reports suggest otherwise. Chinese financial media outlet Caixin, quite bravely frankly, has intensified its own scrutiny of the generic drug sector, highlighting resurfacing inconsistencies in publicly disclosed data. Their article, titled Signs of Inaccuracies, points to statistical errors that persist despite the regulator's efforts to correct them. Earlier this year, the Center for Drug Evaluation, CDE, under the NMPA, suspended public access to generic drug approval data for more than 2 weeks due to inaccuracies. Though CDE cited editorial mistakes as the root cause, discrepancies remain even after the data was restored. Adding to the controversy, a blogger on Blue Sky known as Air Moving Device flagged post-suspension discrepancies that were later shared by Chinese medical professionals. Meanwhile, a Yicai report, also a Chinese financial media outlet, revealed that 2 generic drugs submitted for consistency evaluation showed identical key data, something experts deem, quote, virtually impossible, end quote. This raises concerns about the integrity of the approval process and whether some submissions may have been altered without proper updates. As scrutiny intensifies, questions linger over the reliability of China's generic drug oversight, an issue that has already caused much public concern, anger, and outrage. Next up, we have one more important development to cover, but just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode of China Update, it's always a massive help if you can just click that like button, and if you've not done so already, subscribing is a big help. 45% of regular viewers, people who watch often, are not subscribed. If you think that you should be subscribed, it may be worth checking this, as YouTube unsubscribes people sometimes. And if you think you'll continue watching these episodes, it is a huge help, and it's only a click of the mouse if you subscribe. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description. This channel relies primarily on your support, subscriber support, to keep going, and so this is also a tremendous help. Thank you so much. And finally for today, the People's Republic of China has adopted an increasingly aggressive approach to suppress critical research and reporting on its corporate and human rights practices. Many listening to this will likely be thinking, well, of course, this is nothing new. However, this suppression, which we'll be discussing here, isn't happening within the mainland, but rather in the US and other Western nations, and it is being pulled off through the legal system. Recent investigations, such as those detailed by US-based The New York Times, which we will reference for this development here, expose a growing trend of Chinese firms using legal threats to intimidate and silence foreign researchers, think tanks, and journalists. A prominent example of this legal offensive, The New York Times details, is a defamation lawsuit filed by Smart Shirts, a Chinese clothing manufacturer, against Sheffield Hallam University. The university's researchers have published a report linking the company to forced labour practices, evidence that later influenced debates in the British Parliament. Instead of addressing the findings, Smart Shirts opted to sue, seeking damages and potentially crippling the institution's ability to continue similar research. This case is not an isolated incident either. Chinese corporations have employed a similar strategy across the United States, Europe, and Australia. The Australian Strategic Policy Institute, ASPI, a research group investigating Chinese human rights violation allegations, has been a frequent target. In 2019, telecommunications giant Huawei threatened ASPI with legal action after it published reports on security risks associated with Huawei's operations. Other researchers, such as Anna Puglisi from Georgetown University, have also faced intimidation through legal notices for publishing findings that challenge the narratives of PRC-linked firms. Behind these lawsuits are high-profile international law firms, often based in Western democracies, enabling this form of legal warfare. These firms draft and send threatening letters, file defamation suits, and exploit jurisdictions with plaintiff-friendly defamation laws, such as the United Kingdom, to stifle critical research. Their participation raises serious ethical questions. Should Western legal professionals assist in suppressing information that serves the public interest? And, the New York Times asks, do these firms bear moral responsibility for their role in protecting authoritarian interests? As an aside, as a lawyer myself, I will tell you that if there is enough money offered, you will always find plenty of legal professionals willing to take the case. If a change needs to be made, I would not rely on the moral scruples of lawyers. It should be made, these changes should be done through legislative moves. The financial burden of fighting such lawsuits can be significant. ASPI's legal expenses related to Chinese threats have grown to over 200,000 Australian dollars annually, nearly 2% of its budget. For smaller research institutions and individual analysts, such legal pressures can force them into silence, preventing further scrutiny of Chinese corporate and government practices. The US House of Representatives Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party addressed this issue in 2024, with, in one hearing, a representative warning that the PRC was exploiting the American legal system to silence critics, emphasizing the growing use of lawfare as a tool of, quote, authoritarian influence, end quote. The New York Times piece argues that freedom of speech and academic inquiry must not become collateral damage in the PRC's efforts to suppress criticism. Holding accountable, it adds, not only the PRC firms employing these strategies, but also the legal professionals enabling them is a necessary step in defending democratic values against authoritarian influence. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a good Thursday, and I will see you all tomorrow.